Hi, I'm Ingo from Roastery, and this video is a Q&A session on coffee roasting that we've had with Morten Münchow from CoffeeMind. Morten is one of those people within the coffee world whose opinion I value the most. He has been roasting coffee himself since many years. He has been teaching about coffee roasting. He has developed SCAE education programs, and what's particular about him, he's not taking anything for granted. He really wants to know and understand the things he's teaching about. He's a scientist, so he's taking a scientific approach to understand things, but at the same time, he is able to translate that into easily understandable guidelines and really praxis-oriented teachings that will help you directly to improve your coffee roasting. Ahead of this Q&A session, we've had about a 30-minute presentation by Morten where he summed up the most important things about coffee roasting and theories about coffee roasting. So if you're interested in his teaching, either go to his website CoffeeMind and have a look at the various courses he's offering, or go to our website Roastery and look in the webinar session. You might find another webinar upcoming with him where you then can tune in and directly register in order not to miss that part of his teachings as well. But now I would say let's start and directly tune into the Q&A session. So we can start into the Q&A session, and the first one I had from Johannes is, when it comes to sensory analysis for filter coffee, do you use the classical cupping methods, or would you recommend to brew it then really in these methods that it's going to be brewed later afterwards? And in addition to that, also how much time or aging would you recommend between roasting and sensory analysis?
Yeah, so basically I'll go back to this slide, right? You have to do both. First, you need to map out how does the coffee taste from a laboratory perspective? How does the coffee you've selected and the roast you've done, how does it actually taste? And if you've done some experiments, you want to know what is the actual taste difference? That's the laboratory, right? Next question is, how will this work for my customers? And then this is where, okay, how long time does it take from I roast it until they even get it? How do they brew it? So you need to, but that's a separate question, right? So the short answer is you need to do both. Because otherwise, if you just send it to the customers and do what they, or brew it like they do, you don't get such a clear picture of what's actually going on. So that's why you would need to start with a lab question, which is just a normal cupping, to be honest, if you trust your own skills. So it's not more laboratory than that. You don't need all these fancy clothes and stuff they have here. It's just cupping cups, right? But you need to trust your own evaluation. And the next step is then to put yourself in the customer's shoes and then see what's happening.
Perfect, thanks a lot. I have a bit longer question from Bruno, and he's disagreeing on chemistry. He says fully disagree that chemistry might not be relevant, as you mentioned before. Taste will always directly correlate with the compounds formed in the roasting process. Tasting the roast with several people as measurement is of course a go-to method to generate taste data, but he wonders if there is a way to get even more objective data out of a roast. So in his opinion, the sulfur-containing compounds are key to the taste of coffee. It is no wonder that as 200 plus of these are generated during the roast, and controlling temperature and time will only bring us far. Don't get me wrong, he says this is the masterful art of roasting, which he seeks to learn as well. But he thinks we also need to understand that the chemistry of the Maillard reaction here, he may be biased, of course, because he's has a scientific background. Yeah, what's your opinion on this?
Well, I love chemistry, and when we do scientific projects, my favorite research design is to have chemical analysis, laboratory sensory analysis, and consumer science. Because if you don't have the chemical data, you cannot explain the sensory data. But if you don't have the sensory data, you cannot evaluate the relevance of the chemical differences that you've measured. So you need the chemical data to explain the sensory data, but if you don't have the consumer data, you don't know what is the consumer relevance of you've done. So I completely agree with Bruno that this, and as you can see, this is how we do research. So several of our scientific publications are exactly doing all of these three things, because if you don't have any of these three, you are missing something. So I do agree, but how many of you have a GCMS in your roastery? That's one question. I'm pretty sure it's none. The next question is, even if you had, how would you use it to make decisions? So that's basically my questions. So because making decisions is a sensory act in a roastery context, because this is not the perfect laboratory, right? This is the perfect roastery. So, and this is my whole point, actually. The whole point of this framework that I've shown you here is that we have tried to systematically take each competency pillar and ask ourselves, how can we take what's relevant here and avoid the rabbit hole? So everybody knows this, the rule of diminishing returns, right? How much should you go in depth in something without getting lost in it? It's also called as the Pareto principles, that 20% of the input parameters is responsible for 80% of the outcome. So there's so much common sense in not overdoing it, right? And it seems like in coffee, everybody overdoes it so much that everybody are confused and can't make any decisions. So we've been trying to look at every competency pillar. What do you need to know in each step in order not to overdo it, so that you are not clogged for decisions? And this is my point, that chemistry, however much I love it, I really loved organic chemistry, I love science. It's not that I don't like it. I'm just saying that it might be a rabbit hole for decisions if you're spending too much time on it. And how things taste is what's relevant for your customers. So this is where you need to spend 80% of your attention to talk in Pareto. So that's actually why I'm kind of a bit reluctant to speak too much chemistry, because that would just make, I'm just careful about only talking about things where you can make decisions, relevant decisions for your business based on.
Thanks a lot for that. I have a question from Frank. He's asking, what's your approach on sample roasting?
That's great. Yeah, that's a great question again, because this is, again, why I don't like standards. So in the SCAE standard, roast it to 63. Why would I roast it to 63? Let's say I want to do a really light Scandinavian roast, and I'm looking for green coffee for that purpose. Why would I roast it on my sample roaster to 63? It just doesn't. So I would always, and that's where in this framework, everything derives its relevance from the right side here, right? So who am I trying to impress here? Again, you remember what I said, even for home roasters, is it my mother-in-law on Sunday, or is it my hipster friends for the brunch Saturday morning? So that there's always a purpose what you're doing, and I would adapt the sample roasting process accordingly. So if I'm looking for 5 different Kenyas for my light roast, I would roast them light also in sample roasting. And then I would have some kind of standard kind of roast profile. And this is also where the bullet, you can just waste 1 kilo per experiment and do some time speed as well. But color is really the main thing. So I wouldn't mind not worrying too much about time if the purpose is just to find the optimum Kenya between 5 candidates. I would just roast them light, for example, in a 200 gram sample roast on the bullet, without worrying too much about the timing. As long as I nail the color, I'll get a picture of how it tastes, and then which of these candidates to select. So the short answer is, I would adapt my sample roast profile to the purpose of the product I'm developing, and not worry about standards.
Would you even go so far if, for example, I love Italian espresso, to roast samples into the beginning of second crack?
Sure. If that's the purpose of the product I'm developing, that gives me the best picture of the coffee at the relevant roast color that I'm I'm aiming for.
Interesting. Great. So next question is one that you're going to love. What do you think about flicks and crashes around the first crack?
I think this is an example of you being afraid of a very small spider just because you're looking through it through a microscope. According to the data we have, unless there's something I've missed completely about the whole physics and chemistry around first crack, I just don't see how you can expect a big difference from a small course. That's another thing. If you listen to my podcast, I've listed up 8 features of a good theory. And one of them is to get some sense of proportion, right? So thinking about, again, standing with the roaster, you know nothing, right? You wouldn't expect a huge difference from a minor thing, right? So that's my approach. Unless there's something I've missed about. Basically, what I think is going on is explained by the ideal gas law, where if you have something that is compressed, and all of a sudden it gets more volume because now the steam is escaping. So that's compressed gas. And if it gets more volume, the temperature drops. So it's an artifact. It's not, I don't know even how the beans are behaving. So it's just an artifact reading. And there's no reason to kind of freak out just because that's happening a small thing. It's really, and this is where you can see it on the curve as a small thing. So if it's a small thing on the curve, it's probably also a small thing on from a sensory perspective. And if you kind of remember these extreme differences that people just flat out fail to distinguish if color is kept the same. And I suspect a lot of these theories has been developed because if you focus on one thing and not on color, you might get a lot of experiments done on drum speed, for example, doing a lot of drum speed experiments, and you go, copy it, I prefer that one. Yeah, but that was lighter than the other one, but you just didn't measure color because you didn't think about it. So that's the thing about research design. That's the everything else equal principle. If you're doing an experiment, it's important that you're keeping all other factors the same than the one that you're experimenting with. And I think that's a lot about this flick and crash, where it's not specific. Is it for short development time? Is it for long development time? It's not specific. What else is kept equal? And it's formulated in concept that is far from the first principles of the system. So it's just, I think it's just a bit chasing unicorns. And it's not even specific what it, also in a theory, it needs to be specific. What does it predict? And if it predicts something, it needs to be specific. What descriptors are either going up or down? So if a theory doesn't predict anything, it can be hiding for years because it's never proven to be wrong, right? Doesn't make a difference in the first place. People do it, and they never exposed the theory of being wrong because it didn't predict anything in the first place. It's nicer. Well, nicer for whom? What is going up, down? Give you some predictions here. If you're not predicting anything with a theory, it's not useful, and it can hide in the shadows of not being disproven because it didn't make a difference in the first place.
Perfect. Thanks a lot. Next question is on astringency. That's a great one. Where is it coming from, and how can you deal with it?
Oh, now I have to get to kind of agree with Bruno. Here. But again, well, because here chemistry would be interesting to look at. And to be honest, I don't know. I have seen in our research that astringency does correlate with both time to first crack and development time. So astringency is increased if you increase the development time, and it also is increased if you increase time to first crack. So astringency is caused by our saliva enzyme. So if you start to eat something already in your mouth, things are broken down by enzymes. So that's big proteins. And these will, if there's also tannins in wine, I don't remember what it is in coffee, but the point is these enzymes are collapsing, and then they are starting to become small and granular so that you can actually feel it in your mouth. So that's a mouthfeel astringency. So I don't know what molecule is causing it in coffee, but I can tell you that it is increased with both development time and time to first crack. So increased roast time in general.
Interesting. Next one is also very interesting. He or she is planning to open an own roastery. And the question is, when it comes to training, is it better to start with sensory skills or with roasting skills?
Both. It's like if you need to learn how to run, which leg should you start with? And that's actually why Ida and I, we've been running a bit separate for some years now with our SCAE system, right? So you could do sensory, you could do roasting, and we did the whole SCAE from 2013 to 18, and then it merged and it became too bureaucratic. And science is not about democracy; it's actually about the truth. So we stopped. So the framework I showed you, we created an integrated model on how sensory and controlling the roaster is working together. So for us, we're not seeing it as separate now. So I would say start with both. And this is also why the offer that I've given you at this webinar is a combined. It's both the sensory and the roasting, because we are not really interested in having customers who are not interested in the roasting. Then you can go elsewhere, right? So we are interested in having customers who see the point of integrating both at the same time, because otherwise you are able to drive your car, but you have no compass, so you don't know where to go. So the sensory is your compass. So I wouldn't wait with any of them. I would just start with both at the same time.
Perfect. And the next question, you had it maybe a bit in your pyramid, but what are the most important rules for a new coffee roaster?
I would say develop your competences rather than hoping for getting valuable knowledge from some roast curve or some fancy sensory descriptors. So focus on your competencies to gain confidence. That's the first thing. And the next thing is just think of the most important factors for product development is green coffee selection and roast degree. Then you've already kind of covered most of what's relevant. And then, of course, you can play around with the profile. I'm not saying it's nothing, but people are just hiding in their basement because of the drum speed experiments and stuff like that. And this is where, if you really know what you're doing from a sensory perspective, all the uncertainty kind of disappears.
Okay, perfect. And Mohammed is asking, what is the key to consistency?
I'm trying to. This is the key to consistency. Keeping focus on the parameters that matters most. So if you measure color and worry about the development time, you're logging in 95% of the possible variation. And if you're even wondering about total roast time, unless there's something weird happening to your greens, this will taste the same.
Perfect. And next question, is the assumption correct? Same beans, same end temperature, similar roast profiles leads to same color?
Yes. I would, if you have control over your possible confounders in your roaster. So this is, for example, if you all of the machines I have here, the first roast is just a bit different than the others, just a bit, not a lot, but a bit. And so most often I would just advise people to throw in the house blend as the first thing, or I've noticed that on most roasters, the first roast will show you an artificial, just 2 to 3 degrees lower bean temperature than the rest of the day. So you can also compensate by basically matching color by eye and not only trusting the end bean temperature all the time. You can do that for most of the day if you have an okay in between batch roast protocol. But the first roast is different, and the color palette that you see here that's the one that you will also get a 3D print file of. It's really simple. Just putting your reference in the middle, where there's a small inner plate, and then you can put, when you roast, you can put with your sample spoon, you can take small amounts and put them in the rim of the plate, and then it's easy to make the right decision. If you have the correct color in the middle, it's easier to compare a big amount to a big amount in the middle with the reference, and then the bigger amount that you're taking out with a sample spoon. And then even the first roast of the day, if you have a roast from yesterday, you can nail the color, even though the bean temperature shows something a bit different on the first roast than the rest of the day. I think that's the best kind of answer I can give.
Awesome. It's a great one, especially also for me or for us as a home roasters, because these color measuring machines are quite expensive. So in order to get consistency, you say you could take a plate like the one you have, or you can make one your own, where you have a sample, and then you just compare it to the sample that you have in order to get consistency.
Exactly. Yeah, and we are working with, I mean, when we do research, it's ±1 actron, and this color plate is definitely very helpful because you have a big amount that you compare to a big amount, and you make much better decisions then.
And one question on color. Do you measure only the surface, or do you grind them? And is the color changing after a certain amount of time, like, for example, with the degassing?
Yeah, so I always only measure ground, because for me, the color is an indicator of the total energy accumulation of the beans, which correlates with the total amount of chemical transformation. That's what I want to know. And the bean surface, that is just a consequence of how fast you roast. So I have that information already. So if I roast faster, I already know that the surface is darker than the center. And if I roast slower, I already know that there's a less of a difference. So it doesn't give me extra information. The only situation where I would use surface reading would be if I'm trying to find out if a competitor, well, for a client, for example, if their competitor is roasting fast or slow, then we can compare the surface to the center. And I also know that Rob Hoos and Michael de Renoir, two of my friends, they are working for Loring, so they often are tasked with matching profiles from a probat to a Loring, and they also use surface and center differences to kind of get some extra information on how to do it. So I'm not saying it can't be done, but the education that I do is more experiments on the same roaster with the same beans, and then it doesn't give you extra information because you know if it's faster, it's a bigger color difference. So I always only measure ground, but of course, looking at using the color plate, you look at the surface, and here you have to be ready. If you want to make some faster roasts and nail the color, you have to be ready to accept that they are slightly darker on the surface in order to match the slower ones when you grind it. But that's a bit of a handcraft.
Perfect. So next question is then a specific one on anaerobic naturals. Maybe you can also make a more general information about it. But when it comes to time after first crack, things are moving very fast. So how can we manage a coffee like an anaerobic natural not to take off that fast after first crack?
Use a lower flame size. So let's say that you find with the standard roaster, this is a washed coffee. If you find that if you use the standard roast and you can see that it really takes off here, you could just go to 4 rather than 5 and see if that solves the problem.
And this should be done before first crack.
It depends on the machine and the roast, and this is where I would really like people to do this exercise, because then it's as simple as playing Angry Birds to make decisions. It's just to kind of, if it went too high, next time I'll just go a bit lower with the rubber band on the bird, right? It's really simple like this.
Next question then is on your workshops. He asks, do I need to do the 7-hour virtual class before passing by Copenhagen for the live in-house class?
No. If you're going to any of our classes here in Copenhagen, You can just, for the intermediate, you can just show up even without having done anything before. For the professional, you need to pass the intermediate 3 months before attending the professional. So that's the only constraint. Otherwise, we'll start from scratch anyway, because people, as I say, we start with brainwashing people first and then building people up using very simple concepts. So it doesn't matter. The less you've learned, the better.
Next question is in regards to the diversity, competency, and product development. How far would you differentiate the different roast profiles in regards to color and development time?
Great question. And my answer is, it depends on what you want to do. And this is where I really, and so Ida and I, we're working on a consumer, really simple consumer kind of setup, because it's really simple, right? So let's take the color question. Let's say you have a cafe and they are pretty happy with what you do, and you're roasting, let's say, to Actron 65. I'm just making it very simple. So what I would do, I would create, let's say you're roasting to Actron 65, and then I would create 5 different roasts, starting from 65, 75, 85, 95, 105, for example. And then I would just have a free coffee today, right? 5 thermopots with 5 different roast degrees. Get a small sample of each. You can get a cup of coffee of the one that you prefer. So you can see it's consumer science, but it's really simple, right? And it gives you very valuable information. Let's say that you are surprised that there's a big community who likes 105. You didn't know, right? Because you've just been doing what you're doing. Or you will find out that, okay, some people are okay with 75. And there are a few who prefer 80, 85, but there was nobody above that. Then, because then you know, right? If you know your customers specifically by having exposed them to different products, and this is where the bullet is absolutely amazing, because you can very easily do very precise experiments and get some consumer feedback, because the consumer feedback would tell you. So that's also what when people ask me, so I was a bit worried that also the whole anaerobic, with that question, what curve is best for naturals or anaerobic? It was just, no. I don't know what you want with this. So tell me, who do you want to satisfy, right? So in a sense, I cannot tell you anything about what curve would be best, and I cannot tell you what your customers want. That's why I want to teach you the competences to make up your own mind when you taste something, and have skills to map customer preferences in a very simple setup. Because once you master sensory evaluation yourself and customer feedback, you actually never need to ask me about anything anymore. So I'm trying to kind of set you free from consultancy, which is a bit of a paradox, but that's really our vision, to make people make their own decisions by giving you skills rather than recommendations. Did that answer the question?
I hope so. Otherwise, Stefan, you can ask a follow-up question on it. Then the next one is Jeff, who has built his own fluid bed roaster. And he says the time between the beginning and the end of first crack is about 1.5 minutes. He asks, is this normal? And when does the development start? Does it start after 1.5 minutes, or does it start when the first of the beans are cracking?
Well, it sounds like your system is pretty much full speed all the time, because that's a very, very short time from first crack to second crack. And if you have such a short time, then first and second crack just go into each other. Then there's no there's no pause between first and second crack. So if I were you, I would build in some kind of heat modulator so that you could slow it down, because that's too far. You can see my standard roast is a 3-minute development time to midway between first and second crack, not to second crack, right? So if I did a second crack roast, I would probably have a bit steeper curve in the end, and I would probably never go beyond 4 minutes development time. But I would go to 40-minute development times. Otherwise, it's just burned in the surface.
And then Frank asked, how do you select green beans for blends? Is the density a criteria? And if yes, should they have similar density when putting different beans in a blend?
So, yeah. So the short technical answer is that for pre-blending, because I assume that you're talking about pre-blending when you ask this question, I would say it's a good idea to look for beans with a pretty similar size, density, and of course moisture level. That said, again, this is a technical question to a sensory, what should be a sensory answer, right? Because I would say it depends, right? For example, if you are making a pre-blend, or if you're blending for somebody, for a house blend or something like that, where people add milk, well, as long as you don't use kind of pea berry or robusta, some beans that are very different, as long as it's kind of screen 16, 18, the differences might not be relevant. I mean, it doesn't really matter that much because people are adding milk anyway. And even if they don't add milk, it's probably so dark that they just expect pretty dark coffee, right? But if you're roasting for really discerning customers, then you might even choose to post blend, but only if they can taste the difference and if they care about the story. Because sometimes people just don't care about the story and they can't taste the difference. So that's the whole point about quality control, that you need to be, again, what's the purpose, right? Who are your customers? So again, I'm trying to always remind you about the context of what you're doing so don't look for these technical answers without asking yourself, what's my purpose? And the purpose is given by my context, and my context is, who do I want to satisfy, even if that's yourself.
Great one, because this is a discussion we often have within the home roasting scene, probably also within the roasting scene, about pre-blending and post-blending. So I understood you correctly. You say try pre-blending and only do post-blending when you realize the consumer or in the cup, you can then really taste a remarkable difference.
Exactly. Yeah, that's another good example of this siloed thinking of what's the right and wrong here, right? Is it right or wrong to post a pre-blend? Where something, no, you need to post blend so you can optimize each coffee, which is true, and an extra cost. And only if the extra cost is something your customers want to pay and care about, you should do it. If they don't, you shouldn't, right? So this is where you need to remind yourself always of the purpose context of what you're doing, and not just take these right and wrongs of each silo.
Yeah, perfect. And then there is a question, is the bullet profile that you had, the standard profile, is it available in the roast world?
Yeah, everything I do on the bullet is there. So you can just go and look for the CoffeeMind standard roast.
Yeah. So we look for user CoffeeMind, and then we are going to find them in.
Yeah.
Oh, perfect. Then the so far last question that I see in the Q&A module is, do you have any recommendation on how to set up a hands-on consumer preference study like you mentioned, which is the minimum number of participants that we need for it to be statistically relevant?
Yeah, that's a good question. So as you can see here, the first study I would do would be a color, right? Because that's where I get most information first. So that could be to do, let's say, 4 different roast degrees. And if it's a filter product, you could just brew them in 4 thermopots, show up, give them a small sample, and tell them that they can have a full cup of the one they prefer. It's important to get people, because this is something with commitment. If they go away with the cup they prefer, that's from behavioral economics. I've learned that you you have to, that they need to go away with something before it's the true kind of value. And then you can just measure which one is preferred. And it's a good idea to just make some notes. This is what we did when we did this study here. We just had some age genders and age ranges and very few demographic things, because people don't want to fill out anything. So it's something that you should quickly just every time somebody says something or gives you some information, you should quickly be able to tick this off yourself or in Google Analytics or something, a free software for data collection, so that you can also get some demographic. You could also ask them some questions. What do you work? Where do you live? Is it the local farmer who comes in, or is it the local IT consultant or whatever? So you get a picture of who prefers what, age and stuff like that. But this is really simple, right? Minimum numbers of participants for statistical relevance. As a rule of thumb, at the university, consumer studies should be 100. Most often, you end up with 70 and still get some good data. So perhaps 50 would be enough for you. Perhaps the more the better. So aim for 100, and if you get 50, see if you can get some trends.
Mm-hmm. And the setup that you had here with this consumer testing was just, you had 2 coffees, you gave it to people, and they had to say which one they prefer. How did it work?
Yeah, this is actually data collection for the work that is published in British Food Journal called Coffee High Quality Doesn't Sell Itself. So it's quite a long story. I can see if I can do it fast. They were told that they can win a cup of coffee, and then they were served a high quality and a low quality, and then they were told which one would you prefer to win. So that's their true preference. They didn't know anything. Which one would you prefer to win? So that's an incentive to come up with good data, because there's something at stake here, right? You want to get the coffee you prefer, right? And then they could win the cup by answering the next question correct. So that's also an incentive to answer the next question correct. And the next question was, which one do you think is the most expensive? Not highest quality, because consumers know nothing about quality. So that's Toke, that you can see, the guy with the cap. He's a behavioral economics professor, and so this was a study. And then in our data, we could see that 50% of the people who preferred the low quality pointed out the higher quality as the most expensive. So 50% of the people who said, "I know that's the most expensive, but give me that one." So that was a research project, and this is much more advanced than I asked you to do. But this was you can see that's one of our scientific articles in the collection.
That's a really nice setup.
Yeah,
so
it's really simple, right?
Yeah, and it asks smart questions. So we have about 3 more minutes, 3 more questions. So I'm going to shoot the next questions. Would you recommend to use Robusta as a single origin roast, and which roast profile would you choose? Time to first crack and second crack.
That's again, I would. That depends on the customers you're trying to address. I've done single origin in the Ivory Coast recently, single origin Robusta. But again, you need to, what's the purpose? And do your own experiments and trust your own skills. Because if I gave you a curve, there's so many things I don't know about, a lot of things. So, but you know the context, and if you have the competences, you can take the decisions.
Perfect. Next question goes a bit in a similar direction. To start a roastery, which 5 bean types would you recommend to have on stock and to blend? So, for example, Brazil, Colombia, washed or dry processed.
Again, I would. What's your business model? What customers do you want? But if you want kind of a quick answer, I would. Brazil, Colombia, Ethiopia, Kenya, and I don't know, Guatemala or something like that. But that, now I'm just kind of brainstorming here. But I would need to know a bit more about your business plans.
And then the last one is about the flavor study. Do you verify that the brewing method doesn't influence the flavor?
Yeah, we did two French presses per sample and mixed it. And it's French press, so to avoid any cup differences. So if you cup sometimes and you just add coffee in cups and pour water, there can be a lot of variation. So that's why we take 1.5 liter French presses and mix them. So this way we even out any random things going on. And anyway, we've done 8 individual sensory evaluation of roast profile modulation. So eight separate projects, and then we have merged all those into one big database. So we had 18,500 data points, which is 18,500 times somebody in a scientific setup has scored the intensity of a descriptor of a cup. So we have so many repetitions that everything, all these kind of things are evened out.
Perfect. Thanks for sharing. So last question from my side. If people want to know more about you, you shared the QR code, but beside of that, where can they find more information about you?
I would go to the podcast. 3 hours of free education. That's definitely the best place. And if you go to our website as well, you will see everything we do. CoffeeMind.com.
Perfect. Oh, I just wanted to close, but there came in a question that I want to ask you. That's a beautiful one. So how do you drink your coffee?
Oh, depends on where I am. At home with my wife, it's cappuccino in the morning. And at the office, it's filter most often.
Perfect. Hey, Morten, thanks a lot. Beside of all the questions, we had a lot of thank yous, a lot of people that are really happy with the session and say thanks to all the information that you shared, and also from my side. Besides of this webinar that you did, you were also sharing a lot of information on podcasts and blogs and studies and YouTube. So thanks for all the work you are doing. Thanks for coming to this webinar. It was really great to have you, and all of the participants learned a lot today. Thank you very much.
It's my great pleasure. Thank you so much for organizing this. Thanks a lot.
I hope this video was helpful for you. If you want to know more about coffee roasting, go to either Morten's website CoffeeMind, where you find a lot of online courses and resources to learn about roasting, or go to our website roastery.com, where you find a lot of equipment, roasting machines, green coffee, but then also books and information about roasting. And if you have any more questions, then always come back to me. I look forward to hearing from you.